Damn it.
Oh,
What?
should we not talk over each other?
Hello, I am Bradford Scobie from Burlesque Galaxy. I am delighted to be presenting the lovely, the talented Dr. Lucky, who is the author of Neo-Burlesque Strip Teases Transformation. Say hello, Dr. Lucky.
Hello, Dr. Lucky. Thanks for having me, Bradford.
Oh, that's a classic. I love that one. Look at how bleached out I am. My gosh, as if I wasn't white enough. So, Dr. Lucky, my dear learned friend, describe your book to me. How would you describe your book?
Well, my book is fantastic. First of all, not to over exaggerate the situation, but seriously, folks, my book is focused case studies of 7 innovative performers and themes that emerged in the early neo-burlesque scene in New York City. So it's New York City performers and the early scene.
So when was the early scene?
Well, I would argue that burlesque, as we practiced it in New York and continue to practice it, actually has its roots in avant-garde theater and nightclubs. But the burlesque that we know today sort of started in the mid-90s.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there was a spell where there was no burlesque up until the 90s? I mean, clearly burlesque has been around for centuries or something, but is there a spell where, like, my guess is it died in the 70s? Is that?
Well, that's what many people argue, and that's what scholars argue. But actually, the research that I'm doing now is looking at the nightclubs in the late 1970s and early 80s, and looking at what was happening there as performance art that was all about parody and using the body in explicit ways. So when you think of someone like Karen Finley, who was out at a nightclub doing her performance art at 2 o'clock in the morning and stripping all her clothes off and pouring chocolate all over her body, might not have been read as quote unquote burlesque at the time, but I think that has a lot to do with the type of performance that emerged in neo-burlesque as we know it today.
So how would you say the attitude of neo-burlesque differs from, say, more traditional 40s, 50s, even 60s burlesque?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot more continuities between the two than people recognize or acknowledge. But I think let me talk about what they have in common, and that is just like this knowing wink, like this awareness, this like we know this is ridiculous that we're walking around stage in a gown and rhinestones and these elaborate feather boas when we have to like hop on a subway to get home. So, there's something like a disconnect between this opulence that's being presented and the reality of how people live. And I think one of the main differences is that a lot of the performers in the 50s and 60s, what's known as the golden age of burlesque, that was their full-time careers. That was their livelihood. And there are neo-burlesque performers that perform exclusively or do burlesque exclusively. But I think it's more about the culture of burlesque today. So I define burlesque as a performance art and a participatory culture. And that participating part is a really big part of it. So the audience is in on it. You get to go and dress up. And I think that's part of what makes it a really vital art form.
Yes, I think that's what makes it ruckus too. I did notice in the part of the book about myself, you do talk about there I am,
Bradford Scobie.
Oh, gorgeous. But you do touch on the fact that anything can happen. It's in the moment. There's no fourth wall. And that's the part of the excitement of burlesque versus, say, a more traditional variety show or a play or concert, that it really is a very scrappy, participatory improvisation of an evening. where anything.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's what makes it exciting. Oftentimes the act that goes awry is the one that gets the most applause because, the person's really going for it and they're so in the moment, and there's something really exciting about that. And that's what like theatrical realism was based on, is this idea that you get this slice of life. So you add on top of the slice of life these like ridiculous over the top theatrics, and the fact that costumes get stuck and things go awry and the audience goes wild. So I think that that's part of its appeal.
I think also that the fact that it's, like you were saying before, there's a beautiful ball gown, but they're acting body. It's this parody of upper crustiness. And to see someone dressed so proper and elegant and yet have it be such a body naughty mess, the juxtaposition of those things seems to be very burlesque to me.
Absolutely. And that to me is what burlesque has been about since its inception. And particularly when Lydia Thompson and the British Blondes came to the United States, American burlesque was born. That the through line, what all of those things have in common, that through the golden age, through Neo-Burlesque, is parody. It's poking fun. It's making fun. And that making fun, I think, is what makes it so much fun for the audience, because not only are you poking fun, but you're having a good time. It's revelry, right? And so I think that's what makes it exciting and fun. But also, I think that poking fun is where the subversion comes in, right? So you can poke fun at politics, you can poke fun at contemporary culture, you can poke fun at gender roles, you can poke fun at not everything, but lots of things, and that's also a way, a shorthand way that makes burlesque possibly and potentially a subversive art form too.
Mm-hmm. Also, it does seem like you're punching up.
Absolutely. And that's the roots of Mikhail Bakhtin's Carnivalesque. And I talk about this in my book. And that's like these medieval theater fairgoers that would poke fun at upper crust society, at dominant society. And they did it through these like grotesque, exaggerated bodies. So when I think about Dr. Donut, he very much is this like exaggerated, grotesque body of the carnivalesque. And obviously there's differences between medieval fairgoers and contemporary culture. But I think that using the body and using the extremities and grotesqueness as a commentary, as you put it, to kind of like punch up, helps invert social roles to some degree, or at least that's what.
Your mic is a little wonky.
I can put earbuds on real quick. These little guys aren't charged. What about this guy? What about if I put this on? Can you hear me with this?
Yeah, you're sounding fine now. So
I got a little closer. I got a little closer to you.
All right, maybe that will help. I don't know. Let's move forward. So in the book, you say you follow certain performers. May I ask, can you name some of those performers?
Yeah, of course. So when I started thinking about this book, I started thinking about not only who are the performers and the performances I really enjoy, not just on an entertainment level, but they really get me to think, right? So Miss Tickle's blow up doll is one that instantly comes to mind. And I knew when I came up with the scope of this project, I knew Miss Tickle's blow up doll was something I wanted to talk about. And I do have a chapter on her using her body as a palimpsest. And I also knew I wanted to talk about Dirty Martini, and I knew I wanted to talk about comedy. So I thought about the performers that were around in the early era, and a lot of people use comedy and use humor and wit, but Little Brooklyn came to mind to me as someone that was quintessentially about that. And so I was thinking about concepts, and I was thinking about performers, and I was thinking about performances. And from that, I wrote a chapter on Julie Atlas Muse and ridiculous theater, and connecting her to like this early nightlife, cabaret nightlife that I was talking about earlier. I have a chapter on the world famous Bob, Mystical, Little Brooklyn, and the Monster Beauties of Burlesque. And I also have a chapter on Bambi the Mermaid's Miss Coney Island pageant as product pageantry. And I will scan to see if I'm missing anyone. So I just want to make clear that this is not a comprehensive history. This is not the book on burlesque. It is simply a book.
That it is both intellectual but readable.
That was absolutely my goal. I mean, this went through a couple of peer reviews, but that's a story for another day. And I wanted, like, you know, I wanted educated people to be able to read it and not just academics like sitting in their little ivory towers. So I did make it's readable for our average audience. So that was really important to me. But it also, I must say, it's pretty, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of footnotes in there. And there are a lot of books I read. But you can skip that and just look at the pretty pictures.
Oh, and there's pretty pictures.
And I just want to give a shout out to Ed Barnes. There are 50 color images in this book, and Ed Barnes provided 38 of them. And so his work, and all photographers and videographers, their work in documenting burlesque is so important because it's a live performing art, right? So if you weren't there and if it's not documented, it kind of like, as Peggy Phelan says, you know, live performance only exists in the present, and then it disappears. So, and the reason why I did it like that was so that, you know, you could read the description of the act, and with several images, it turns into like a little bit of a photo essay so that the reader can kind of like slow down and see the images. And I hope that this propels people to go out and see live performance and to check out the performances talked about in the book in person. And that is the goal, is to help, you know, preserve, but also celebrate this art form. And the other thing that I sort of, when I was picking images, another thing that I sort of focused on was showing, you know, the stage lights, the side of the wing, the spectators looking at the performers. And the reason why I did that is because, like you were saying, it sort of gives you a sense of feeling of what was happening. So instead of that perfection of a studio shot that's like perfectly angled, I like the glaring spotlight in the photographer's face. Like I like that. So I was looking for that, the messy backstage coming into the frame, if you can put it that way. So I chose images that accomplished, hopefully.
Yeah. It also helps with the sort of the grittiness of the situation, you know, like those images you just showed now, they look ruckus and a little sloppy, and that's very burlesque, you know. Everyone's dressed to the nines, but you know, anything could happen, and it's delightful when things go awry, hopefully.
Exactly, yeah. If anyone's interested in this book, I want to encourage you to order it directly from Rutgers University Press. You can order it anywhere that books are sold, but ordering directly from the publishers helps the publishers. And they are, you know, academic presses are not for profits, so they're struggling just like all of us are. And I also wanted to mention that the audiobook is coming out soon, and it is narrated by the one and only Miss Astrid, also known as Kate Valentine. And Miss Astrid makes an appearance quite a bit in this book. She was an important part of the early scene. And I actually will have a discount code specifically for the Burlesque Times fans and friends. So keep your eyeballs peeled for that. And that will come along with this post.
I think that covers it-ish, my dear.
Well, thank you for having me. And thank you. Just remember that reading is fundamental.
Thank you, Dr. Lucky. I love you.
Love you. Thank you for having me.